All right, good afternoon, everyone. We should all be here for the Mastering Your Qualitative Methodology webinar. I'm hoping everyone is having a wonderful Monday, or as wonderful a Monday as you can have. I'm going to give everybody a minute or so to get here, so get comfortable, grab a beverage. All right, you should be able to see the PowerPoint on the screen. We'll be getting started in just a few seconds. So before we begin, I am Dr. Johanna Broussard. I am the Qualitative Research Specialist here at Statistics Solutions. And we are a full-service dissertation consulting and assistance company, and we will discuss more about that at the end of this presentation. So it is 4 o'clock Eastern Time. Let us begin. This is the webinar on Mastering Your Qualitative Methodology. This is about drafting, preparing, and dealing with the third chapter of your dissertation. So we will be discussing what goes into the section, but we will not be going over how do I choose a methodology. We have a webinar on that, and you can schedule up for that through the link that has been placed in the chat by Sierra. You will receive a recording of this webinar that will include the PowerPoint as well. So you can go back and you can reference it as you need. But given the time frame it takes to go through this material, it is unlikely that I will be able to give detailed information on any specifics. Should you request aid on your specific situation, I will be giving information that will be applicable to all and answering questions to the best of my ability with that limitation. So let us now begin. The qualitative methodology chapter has the following sections: the introduction, the research design, which often includes the rationale for this particular study, the role of the researcher, the methodology, issues of trustworthiness, and a summary. If we think about academic writing, it all has the same basic tripartite structure. There is the introduction, the body, and the summary or conclusion. So with that being said, the introduction is the introduction. It is where you set up the study in the mind of your reader. You give us sort of a teaser for what we can expect, and you get us excited by telling us what you are going to talk about. The body is the research design, the role of the researcher, the methodology, and the trustworthiness discussion, in where you tell everything you can in as much detail as you can provide. And of course, the summary, the conclusion, is where you tell us what you just told us, and then you transition to whatever comes next, which would be your results chapter. But this structure of introduction as the setup, the body as explaining in detail, and the conclusion as summarizing and then transitioning works for all academic writing, from the paragraph level through the essay, through the chapter, even, if you will, through the dissertation itself. It's what's referred to as the syllogistic form, and it is common across academic disciplines. Now, the introduction, you do have to do a few things. You have to restate the purpose of your study. And in general, most schools want it to be stated verbatim as you did in the introduction and as you did in chapter 2. A lot of academic writing will involve repeating things again and again the same way. You'll probably also remind the audience of some of the background information, some very important facts, why the study is important, what the research questions are, and then you will preview the major sections of the chapter that will follow. An introduction gets the audience's attention, gives us enough background information so that everyone starts on the same page, and then previews what is to come. It is essentially the teaser trailer and the outline for the dissertation chapter in particular. And so you want it to be clear, you want it to be detailed, but you want it to be concise enough that it doesn't seem intrusive. So roughly you're looking at a page in length, double-spaced, 12-point Times New Roman font. So you want to hit the highlights, give us what we need, tell us what we can expect, and then launch into giving us what you've told us we're going to find. By moving into the research design. If your school template doesn't want the research questions in the introduction, they will want it in this section. So, but this is where you can remind us what your specific research questions are. You can identify and define the phenomenon, the case, the concept being studied. Are you studying the phenomenon of self-care among mental health professionals? Are you studying, say, how a particular emergency room communicates when dealing with patients with severe trauma? What is it that you were studying? Are you studying the experience of death amongst aging baby boomers and planning for a funeral? You identify the concept, you talk about the tradition, qualitative or quantitative. Since you're here, I'm going to assume you're going to be doing qualitative, and the design, case study, phenomenology, ethnography, etc. Remember that because this is a dissertation, you are not only telling us what you are going to be doing and justifying it by saying, this is what I'm going to do and this is why it's appropriate. You will also need to spend time explaining why the alternatives are less appropriate for what you intend to study and the questions you seek to answer in response to the problem that you created this study to resolve. Part of this, as you need to think of your dissertation not as the great study to save the world, you are demonstrating to a committee of scholars that you have the ability to make the decisions regarding professional level research. And so being able to explain, I'm doing this, this is why it's appropriate, here are some other options, this is why these are less appropriate. They're not bad options, but they're not as good for what I'm trying to accomplish as this is. This is what the research design section is designed to do. This will be, depending on how much detail you need, roughly 3 to 5 pages. So now let's talk about why you should use a qualitative design. Are you looking at textual data, manuscripts, interviews, performances, festivals, rituals? Are you looking at things that are non-numerical? A qualitative design is better for things that are non-numerical. Are you trying to understand people's experiences, perspectives, things that are really harder to quantify and require more detail and elaboration? It can be easy to quantify the results of a standardized test, but it can be harder to quantify the perspectives of teachers have in preparing their students in a particular school district. And so this is where a qualitative study would be really, really good. How do you plan on collecting data? Or do you want to do interviews? Do you want to conduct focus groups? Do you want to examine documents, whether it be news footage, newspapers, manuscripts, journals, notes, lesson plans? Do you want to conduct observations in a classroom? Are you going to do a full ethnographic participant observation where you participate and observe a ritual or a cultural performance like Mardi Gras in New Orleans, or a graduation ritual or a quinceañera? What type of data do you plan to collect? If you plan to do any of these types of data collection, you're probably going to be doing a qualitative research design. And maybe your goal is not to generalize. Maybe your goal is to understand a group's experiences in their fullness, in their complexity, in the way they can contradict each other. That's what a qualitative design is good for. Remember, you will not be testing a hypothesis. You will be exploring phenomenon, perspectives, and experiences. You will not be quantifying results. You will probably be simply presenting what was said in a way that shows these are the experiences. This is the common experience. These are divergent experiences. We're not looking for numbers. We are looking for depth in qualitative research. And so let's spend some time talking about the different research designs. In general, we have case study, phenomenology, a generic, often called a general, grounded theory, and ethnography. These are the big qualitative research designs. First, let's talk about a case study. What is a case study good for? A case study is really good for getting a specific example over time and being in depth. Maybe you're looking at a particular school and how it teaches English to non-native speakers at a particular grade level, and you have the time and the funding to then study this for a year or 2 years or 3 years. Maybe you want to study this case because it is atypical. Maybe they're doing something that should not work, but is. Maybe they're doing something that should work, but for some reason it isn't. Maybe this is an exemplary case where their results are better than could be expected. Maybe this case is a counterpoint for what research suggests. Maybe this case is someone doing something new, and so you're taking the research in a new direction. And so taking this one case and studying it in detail over time to give us a rich, deep, thorough analysis. That's what a case study is good for. Sometimes you will do a multiple case study where you have multiple research sites, but they need to be bound by a unifying factor. Using the example of teaching English to non-native learners, maybe they're all in the same school district. Maybe they're all using the same experimental teaching method. Maybe they all have a statistically significant population of non-native learners that is higher than should be expected in this part of the state, in this county, in this country. So what is it that unifies these cases that makes it something that you could study all of these for this analysis? You will probably be using multiple data collection methods. You'll probably be observing your case that you're studying. You might be looking at documents connected to the case using the educational example I've just gave, test scores, lesson plans, assignments. You might be interviewing teachers. Remember, if you're interviewing students and they are under the age of 18, they are a protected group, and that will require full IRB review and oversight. But you might interview teachers, you might interview parents, maybe a focus group of parents instead of individual parental interviews. You'll probably be doing multiple methods to try to get as full and as deep a picture as you can. So what does a case study do? As I've said, it generates a rich description of what you were studying, and it allows you to examine the emergent themes from the study of each individual case. But perhaps you want to look for common experience among different people. That is where you would probably move toward phenomenology, where you're looking for the lived experiences of participants with a common phenomenon. And you are trying to describe the meaning that these individuals assign to the experience. I've already mentioned this. Two of my clients are looking at the phenomenology of self-care as experienced by mental health professionals. And so how did they conduct it? Well, they did in-depth interviews, roughly 45 minutes to 60 minutes in length. Some were longer, with their participants. And they chose phenomenology because they wanted to see what the common experience and understanding and meaning of self-care was for these professionals. And so the goal of phenomenology is to take all of these people's experiences with this thing and then distill it down into the essence of that which you were studying. What is the essential experience of phenomenology, of the phenomenon in question? Phenomenology is a bit more work than some of the other qualitative methods, and it does require a bit more thought and spending a bit more time analyzing one's data. But maybe you're not sure what you want to do qualitatively, you just know you want to do qualitative design. That's what a general or a generic qualitative design is good for. Maybe your research questions do not fit squarely within another design. Maybe there are elements from different designs. Maybe you just sort of want to understand the experience as opposed to the inward perception and meaning. Maybe you're doing a mixed methods study. If you are doing mixed methods, then a generic qualitative design is probably what you're going for. A generic design is one of the easiest to set up. You just have to set up that you are doing a generic qualitative analysis and then explain why the other specific methods don't really fit. You will likely be doing interviews. You may be doing some questionnaires or some written and oral surveys. If it's mixed methods, you will probably be doing questionnaires and surveys as well as interviews. Qualitative surveys are a thing. We'll talk later about why those aren't exactly easy to get good and meaningful data from, but they are a thing to think about. A generic qualitative design yields an understanding of what's called outer world content. You can understand the experience, but you don't, and you get some of the perception, but you don't get the deep inner meaning. You sort of get how people experienced it, and you get what happened. It's good for surface level work, and it's good if you're mixed methods because you'll be doing multiple types of data collection. But it doesn't get that in-depth inward meaning experience that case study, phenomenology, and even ethnography and grounded theory can do. But it is easy. It is easy to set up. It is easy to complete. And so it is quite popular with a lot of students. And then we come to grounded theory. Grounded theory is quite attractive for those who come from a quantitative background, because grounded theory is the best way for generating theory from the collective perspectives of a vast number of participants. If you're from quantitative and you're used to theory and making new theories, this will seem very attractive to you. However, I do want to point out the vast number of participants. It is an iterative research option. We'll talk more about that in a second. It's good when there is little known about a topic, and so we don't know how to think about it because we don't know enough about it. But it is not for novice researchers. With grounded theory, you will collect data. You will analyze the data. You will form a theory from that analysis. Then you will go back into the field, collecting more data that you will analyze and then check against your theory, modifying the theory as needed. And you will do this iteratively until you reach theoretical saturation, the moment at which new data does not emerge from the interview that changes the theory. So it's a lot of work. It takes many years to do a grounded theory study in a way that gives it justice. You will probably be using interviews, field work, text and document analysis, memoing. It's a lot of work. It takes a lot of time. It's something I would suggest you wait on until you get the title Professor Emeritus or until you receive tenure, because you need to know a lot about your method. You need to be good at data collection and data analysis. You need to have the time and the funding to go into the field, back into the field, and back into the field as many times as it takes. How many times will it take till you reach saturation? The answer is as long as it takes. There is no set limit. But what does it do? It derives theory that is based in the data generated from the lived experiences of the participants. We have a question. How from titles and objectives we may say what type of design this research has? Could you explain that a little bit more? I'm not entirely sure what you mean by that. So if you don't mind, please explain what you mean by that. And I'll give you a moment to do it while I go back to talking about what grounded theory does. It does produce a broad explanation of a process, of an action, or of an interaction. So if you really, really need to go through and try to explain some big phenomenon, and it's something no one has really studied. I do have one client doing grounded theory. She's studying the condition of being homeless or unhoused among elderly women, specifically women who are over 55, because it is a group who are experiencing an increase in the frequency of being homeless and they are often not studied in favor of looking at unhoused teenagers or veterans or things of that nature. And so she's trying to develop a theory, and it is a struggle when you are uncertain of your method. Grounded theory takes time. So if you're on a time crunch, which, let's face it, even if you're just starting your graduate coursework, they want you in and out with coursework and dissertation 4 to 5 years. With grounded theory, you're looking at, you probably need 3 or 4 years just for the data collection and analysis. It is not something to be taken lightly and to assume it will be quick, because it more than likely will not be quick. And ethnography, the hallmark research method for the field of anthropology and to an extent sociology. Ethnography is great for understanding a problem or practice within the cultural and societal context in which it happens. This is why we talk about things like ritual or ethnography. My master's degree was in ethnography, and one of my professors, the late Miles Richardson, was famed for a book that he titled Being in Christ and Putting Death in Its Place. He looked at the focus of death in Latin American Catholic ritual. So how did ritual deal with death? How did Christian Catholic ritual in Latin America, in some cases, center death in the ritual focus? But it was understanding this practice of ritual and death, understanding of how we perceive death in its cultural context. It is a holistic inquiry, looking at networks of people, institutions, social groupings. It's also one that takes long periods of time, because you have to go into the field and you have to observe the interactions in the field. You'll probably be talking to a few people. You may not be conducting as many interviews as you would in a case study, but you will likely have 2, 3, 4, 5 key interlocutors who will help explain things to you. But your field work will be extensive, and you will be participating in the rituals as well as observing them. And part of that is so that you can get a sense of the embodiment of the practice. It's one thing to watch people perform a religious rite, or if you're in southern Louisiana during right before the Lenten season, the Courir du Mardi Gras, the Cajun Mardi Gras in small town, with the chasing of the chicken and the going from door to door begging for ingredients to make a communal gumbo, to which you will invite the entire town. It's one thing to watch people perform this tradition. It's another thing to understand it when you're actually participating, when you are making the Mardi Gras costume, when you are walking in the parade, when you are begging, when you are chasing a live chicken, when you are sharing a communal meal with your neighbors. That often includes a dance and any leftovers being distributed equally amongst the community. So observing is one thing, participating is another, and ethnography includes participation and observation. And this can be something that you have to think about, because some famous ethnographers have studied things like cock and dog fighting in places where it was illegal. And you have to deal with the ethical issues. Yes, Abdul, I see you've raised your hand, and what is it that you need? Abdul? Okay, well, while I wait for Abdul to respond,
here for the observation, we may use anecdotal records.
you may use, can you say that? I'm not sure what you mean. A what?
Anecdotal records. We may use for the observation anecdotal records also. In this way, we can save our observations.
That is something you'll discuss with your chair. But more than likely, yes, because I'm having a hard time understanding you. That's why I asked you earlier to type your clarification.
Yes, madam, it is a network problem. Okay, ma'am, continue.
Mm-hmm. As I was saying, because you have to deal with ethnography if you're doing something like animal fighting or famous ethnographers who have studied criminal behavior like drug dealing or the mafia. One.
Yes, ma'am. No, ma'am. I am asking. I am adding something in the point how it is done. How it is done. In what way we can do this type of research to collect data.
Okay. That is not this chapter is focused on writing the chapter. This is not how you go about doing each of these ethnographies. But if you're asking what about, you're saying something about observation and card, could you, I can't really understand what you mean. Could you write the words out? Is what I've asked.
Yes, ma'am. Okay, ma'am. Continue.
Okay. As I was saying, because with ethnography, you have to ask the question, how do I disclose my researcher status, or do I? And so you have to think about your safety, because anytime you're in the field, wherever you are, whatever you're doing, some of these things can become problematic. You can be putting yourself in physical danger. A friend of mine in my master's program studied drug use in South America. Well, you have to deal with how you handle drug use. You have to deal with how you handle how that interacts with your body and your mind, the legalities of it. How do you disclose your researcher status? There is a lot in with dealing with something that deals with field work that you have to think about. And so if you're going to do this, I want you prepared for all of the things you may have to consider. Do I disclose my researcher status? The answer is only if it's safe to do so. Be careful with participation, because if you are participating in illegal activities, you can become legally culpable. Saying I was doing research does not stop the police from arresting you. So you have to think about that. If you're studying, say, mental health amongst combat veterans and PTSD and suicidal ideation, being aware that if they disclose participating in a war crime, you are legally obligated to report that. And so that is something that you then have to think about and be prepared for. The IRB will go over this with you, but it's easy to not be prepared and not be familiar with it. And so, because you often think, well, nothing's going to happen. Also, if you're in the field in anthropology, there's the old adage, you didn't really do field work until you get malaria. Yes, Abdul?
Yes, ma'am. I am adding something that all of these are research ethics. We should take care about research ethics.
Yes, you
Uh,
should.
y- yes, yes, yes.
But
Uh,
often people don't think about these things when they're selecting a method. And this is something you need to think about when you're
yes,
choosing a
ma'am. Yes,
method.
ma'am. Yes, ma'am. In the start of the topic, when we selected topic or title, we should take care about this also. That what from which type of society, from which type of participant we will take our data.
Yes,
So
you
it is.
should. However, you might not be aware of all of the issues when you're doing that. That's why I'm bringing
Oh,
it to your attention now to make sure that you are aware and that if you haven't selected your population yet, that you are thinking about it because
yes,
not
yes, ma'am.
everybody is in the same place. Not everybody has started. And so I want to make sure, and as someone who has been a college professor, it's bet when you have more information, it's easier to make an informed decision.
Yes, yes, ma'am. It's it's very good to
Yes,
to prepare, to make a plan to prepare the the population according to your topic, your research. There from the particular person we get our data
yes,
in such a way that there is no problem in data collection process.
yes. But if you don't know
We
what
should.
potential problems are, you can't avert them ahead of time.
Yes, yes, ma'am. Well, of course, it should for every researcher to take care about all of this.
Yes. But as someone who has been a graduate student, when I started learning about the methodologies, I was unaware of all of the issues. And so I am giving you the benefit of my experience because you may not be aware of all of the issues, especially if
Yes,
you are a novice researcher.
yes, yes.
Okay.
Okay.
So the purpose of an ethnography, as I was trying to say, is to produce something that is in depth, something that is deep, something that goes and brings the perspective of the participants in situ. It's not just because you will be showing off and you'll probably be having pictures. Now there will be video footage. You might have, you might use your phone to record. You can show yourself participating. You can talk about how it feels to live the experience. And this is why going over everything and every potential pitfall, and also now, again, a good program will help guide you through this, but knowing if you need to get your shots ahead of time because of where you're going. A friend of mine did research on voodoo in Puerto Rico and Haiti. And as a result, she couldn't conduct field work until she had certain vaccinations boosted and certain vaccinations that she didn't get because these diseases are not common in the part of the United States where we were attending school. And so again, all of these things have to be taken into consideration, which is what, and then if you were part of the culture that you were exploring, how to navigate that part of your identity, which we'll talk more about in a second. With the role of the researcher. Again, are you an observer only? Are you a participant only? Are you going to do both? Because depending on which role you assume, it can create power dynamics that can either help or hinder data collection. Depending upon, it can also lead to different investitures of time and of resources and of energy. And they give different results and experiences. collecting data through interviews on a topic helps you understand one aspect of it. Actually participating in it and going through the process, getting that embodied experience, gives you another form of understanding that you can bring to your analysis. And so you have to think about this. You have to identify any potential conflicts of interests, power dynamics. I've mentioned some of these things with the legal issues and some of the ethical issues, because these are things that can pop up here. If you are, say, interviewing people who are your employees and you hold power over their job, that can lead to a conflict of interest. If there is some sort of yes, Abdul. Yes, Abdul.
Yes, ma'am. I want to add something here regarding your this point. According to Pakistan,
Mm-hmm.
yes, if here in Pakistan we may collect data from female and ask something about sex, that it will be a great issue for you, that you are asking about these things from women, uh, because our society uh, and religious problems, that we cannot ask
Mm-hmm.
about about sex from our females, and cannot get data in such type of information to get some things about sex from female.
Yes, and that is something, as I said at the beginning, that we don't really go into specifics of individual research, but that is
Yes,
a power, as I mentioned, power dynamics. That is power
yes,
dynamics at
yes,
play, and so that is something
yes,
that, well, while that applies to you, that may not apply to specifically anyone else in the webinar, and
yes,
that's why I'm trying to be general and talk about that.
yes,
Thank you for the contribution, but we do have to keep moving.
yes, yes. Okay, ma'am.
So, and with what Abdul said, you have to think about these power dynamics. Some people, some groups do not trust researchers. If you've taken an IRB course, you've learned about all of the different ways that, or some of the different ways, but not all, that research has been used without ethics, from Nazi doctors in World War II to the Tuskegee experiment, the Stanford prison experiment, and things of that nature. And there are plenty of others that have come and gone, that have been discussed, but we have to think about, as a result of that, certain groups do not trust researchers, with good reason, with fair reason. And so how do power dynamics, conflicts of interest play into your role as a researcher, and how will you deal with these? So you have to think about potential areas of bias and how those can be mitigated. This can be anything from your own personal beliefs on the topic, your prior experience. If you're doing phenomenology, you have to set aside your preconceived notions and discuss those. Maybe, if I were to study university education, having taught at a university for over a decade, I have certain preconceived notions and biases as to what I would expect to find. So what are some things that I might find that might bias me? How will I mitigate these biases? And as I've already mentioned, you have to discuss any applicable ethical issues. We often think about this in terms of, do you work at the site you're studying? Even if it's a collegial relationship with your participants. You know, if you're trying to maintain anonymity, people know each other, people in the workplace talk, and so word can get around. These are things to think about and how that can impact your participants. Because if word gets around that someone said something to a boss in a focus group, that can be problematic. And so we have to think about all of these things as we choose them. And so when we're talking of our participants, we need to think about who our population is. The population is the big group of people the sample will be drawn from. I was speaking to a client just before this who is studying members of Generation Z who are not re-enlisting in the US Army. So the population for her study would be members of Generation Z who were once members of the United States Army. Sampling strategy. We use non-random sampling. Primarily, we will be using purposive sampling. You want to sample individuals who can answer the questions that you need answered. If you're studying if you're asking why Gen Z doesn't re-enlist in the Army, you need to pick members of Gen Z who were in the Army who didn't re-enlist. If you want to study people who teach English to non-native speakers at the middle school level in Southern Maryland, you need to find people who meet those criteria, what we call inclusion and exclusion criteria. What are the characteristics that people must meet to participate in your study? How do you plan to verify this? With government, anything with the government, there's paperwork. With other things, it can be a little bit more nebulous. And so you'll have to think about this and talk with your chair. How many participants will you have? Ideally between 12 and 15 is a good number because you would like to have enough to get data saturation, but you don't want too much that it makes analyzing it frustrating. And then you will discuss the steps to identify, the steps to contact, and the steps to recruit participants. Maybe you'll identify them through a school district's website. You'll contact them via publicly available email. You'll send out a recruitment flyer, whatever you plan to do. And you'll talk about the size of the sample, and you'll talk about reaching data saturation, the point at which no new information comes from interviews. Then you will talk about your instruments. You'll keep in mind the first and foremost data collection instrument in qualitative research is you. So you must always mention that you are the primary instrument. Maybe you'll have observation sheets. Maybe you will have an interview protocol which lists the questions. Maybe you'll have a focus group guide. Sometimes observation sheets are helpful, sometimes they're not available for what you want to study. Chances are you will be creating your own instruments, your own interview questions. I'm sorry, Abdul, if you can type your question into Q&A, we have to keep moving. Maybe you will use something that's already been published, but that's not very common in qualitative research. If you're going to do a document review, where will you get the documents from? How will the documents be verified for accuracy? These are things to think about. Again, government documents are fairly easy to find once you learn to navigate government resources and government forms. And they often are verified by a third party already, so that takes care of that. You need to also demonstrate how your data sources are going to be sufficient to address your research questions. How do the documents contribute? How does each question that you are asking in an interview related to your research question or your research questions. You'll be needing to do that. And then I already discussed this in some bit, how you'll be recruiting people. So for each instrument, where will you collect the data? The site. Do you need permission to collect data at that site? Who will collect the data? You. How many data collection events will there be? So if you have 3 sites, how many interviews at each site? How many times will you interview each participant? How long will each data collection last? Interviews are usually 45 minutes to an hour. Focus groups are usually an hour to an hour and a half. How will you record the data? Zoom, a handheld digital recorder, your cell phone, one or more than one method. What are your contingency plans in case of attrition? In case people pull out or don't make it, how are you going to collect enough data? What's plan B? Debriefing. How will you debrief your participants after the interview, after the focus group, after the data has been collected? What are your follow-up procedures? Will there be member checking? Will you ask them to check over your results? Will there be a transcript verification where you submit the transcript to the participant and ask them, does this represent is this what you said? Do you want it to be maybe cleaned up? Could you maybe help me explain what this garbled bit is here that I don't remember what you said and the recorder didn't pick it up clearly? All of this you have to have plans for. And then you have to have your DAP, your data analysis plan. So again, how are all the data connected to your research? How will you code the data? Traditionally, in general, you're probably going to be using Brown and Clark for most coding processes. If you are doing phenomenology, Saldana is quite popular. And there are others as well, but those are the 2 most common. So describe the coding procedures you're going to use. Will you use software or will you code by hand? If you're using software, what software application will you be using? In Vivo, MaxQDA. We're currently working on our own qualitative research analysis software. How will you handle discrepant cases? What happens when there's a case or 2 that doesn't conform to the patterns that have emerged? In qualitative research, we discuss those. You're going to have to figure out what you're going to do. And now we move to trustworthiness. This is the last section of the body, but it is nonetheless important. So with trustworthiness, we often talk about the following things. Credibility. How are we going to have confidence in the accuracy of your findings? This is established through triangulation, multiple methods, multiple data sources. If multiple sources show us a similar pattern, the data is probably credible. Transferability, how applicable the findings are to other contexts. That's why we look and we talk about the context. We describe that. We provide thick, rich descriptions. We give what are called descriptive statistics or demographics so that other researchers can see how different their population is from ours. We look at dependability. How consistent are the findings are to replication in detail of what was actually experienced? Is there sufficient information? Is there sufficient description? Did you leave an audit trail? This is why you have that. This is why you describe your data collection plan, your data analysis plan, and you go step by step. Because we want to see the step by step so we can see if mistakes were made, where mistakes were made. And so that way we know that you have been consistent and methodical in your approach. And confirmability. Were the findings based upon the participants and not the researcher's own opinion? Did you use member checking once you analyzed your data? Did you send your findings to your participants to say, hey, does this sort of jive with your experience overall? It probably won't be 100%, but does this seem to fit the general pattern of how you understand this or how you've experienced this? What do, if they say, and then in your results, we deal with what happens if they say no. But this is where you describe what your plan is. The methods chapter sets up the promise and the plan for what you're going to do, that the results chapter will then come along and demonstrate what you actually did. And so we have to think about ethics, agreements to gain access to through the IRB, site permissions, any letters you will be sending to participants to recruit, all of these things. Treatment of human subjects, the permissions that you have to get. We've already discussed ethical considerations in recruitment and data collection to a bit, but you'll be talking about all of this. How will you handle and how will you treat your data? Will it be fully anonymous? Will it be confidential? Both have benefits, both have drawbacks. Which one are you choosing and why? And then what are your plans to secure data and then the destruction of that data after a certain time period? Will you keep all data in a filing cabinet that was locked, as we did in the old days? Will it be on a password protected and encrypted hard drive that is used for this and this alone? How will it be? Where will it be kept? Even beyond that, in an office, in a lockbox? How will you destroy the data? You can't just digitally delete files and expect them to be gone from the hard drive. Will you use a full data wipe? Or will you do something that's really, really fun with computers? Will you take a sledgehammer and completely destroy the hard drive? It's also fun with printers too, but you have to have plans. Normally, schools say you keep the data for 3 to 5 years after you finish the study, and then you destroy it. You have to have a plan in place. And then we finish up the chapter with the summary. In the introduction, you set up what you were going to say, and you told us what you were going to tell us. In the body, you told it to us in all of your glorious detail, and now you tell us what you just told us with a recap that then pulls us along and transitions us into the next chapter. Remind us of the problem, remind us of the purpose, restate your research question, give us general talk about your methods that you plan to do to collect the data, and then remind us that in the next chapter, you will present the results of the data collection and analysis. Just like the introduction was roughly a page, the summary should be roughly a page. And the rest of the chapter should be the body where you describe in detail. This is the methods chapter for a qualitative research study. This is everything that you have to think about. This is everything you need to include. And so this chapter can be daunting. It's okay. The dissertation process is a marathon and not a sprint. Start with your problem, your purpose, and your research questions. Once you've got that, what data do you need? Who do you need to talk to find the answers? What documents, if any, will give you these answers? Do you need to do observations? Because schools want the data and the dissertation done quickly, don't make it harder on yourself than it needs to be. This is, in many ways, a recipe. So you have the ingredients and you have the instructions. And realize your methods will change over time. This chapter is the expectation, and if anything changes during the data collection process, You talk about that in the beginning of the results chapter. And we have a webinar for that where we explain how you go about doing that and what you can include. So that said, I do want to remind you that Statistics Solutions is a full-service dissertation consulting company that provides graduate students and other scholars with timely editorial support for their dissertations and scholarly projects. We can take you all the way from topic development through your final defense. And then we can move, and then we can even take you to turning it into an article. Just a second, guys. We are almost out of time. I'm going to try to get to you. Please type any questions in the Q&A. If you would like to schedule a free 30-minute consultation that is available Monday through Friday, 9 to 5 Eastern Time, United States, please contact Janine Glace at info@statisticssolutions.com. The phone number is 1-800-437-8622. Now, Michelle says, I'm learning off the webinar. If I cannot find inclusive participants at one community college in the South, could I seek up north at my alma mater? As I said at the beginning, that is something we cannot answer in this webinar because it is specific and unique to your situation. That is something you should discuss with your chair. I would probably suggest not, because the South and the North have very different cultures, and it might be two very different things. So that being said, it is something that your chair would have to give you final approval on. So please consider them. I can help to an extent, but your chair can help you with more specifics. So that being said, if there are no further questions, seems we have Tasmania and New Zealand. Again, Rona, please type your question in the Q&A so that way we can move quickly, because we need to get moving. It is 4 o'clock here. For me, it is 5 o'clock Eastern US. If you are on the other side of the world, it is very, very early in the morning. You will receive a copy of this sent to your inbox along with the PowerPoint so that you have it to reference back later. Roma, I will give you a minute to get your question typed into the chat, into the box. But we need to move quickly. Okay, how can you consistently match your literature with your research question? We have a webinar on literature, and that is something to ask in that webinar. This is specifically on the methods chapter. So you guys have been great. Thank you for being here. Should you need help, we are always available. That being said, it is 5 o'clock in Eastern Time US. It's later for some of you. I am not going to hold you any longer. Have a wonderful evening, a wonderful week, and we all wish you success in your graduate level careers and in any careers and in life beyond your dissertation. Goodbye.